The recording has started. So Scrum is an agile process, and it's usually used for product development, especially your software development. And what happens actually in this case, your software company managers need the information of cost of development of software, what is the cost involved, then next. What is the time estimation or duration, or the final estimated time which is needed for the whole development of the software, and when is the release of the software, what is the actually deadline or the timeline for that. And Scrum is actually a project management framework that is applicable to any project with which needs or requires actually aggressive deadlines or complex requirements, or a degree of uniqueness. In Scrum, also, projects move forward via through a series of iterations, and they are actually called sprint. We will look into that in the next slides. Sprint. So sprint is a concept is somehow associated with Scrum. And again, all of them are as a Scrum, Sprint, everything is associated with the Agile development technique or methodology. And through, as I just mentioned, that in Scrum, projects usually move forward through a series of iterations. You call it as sprint. So sprint usually lasts for about 2 to 4 weeks. So that is the basic timeline of a typical spring, and it goes on in different phases or iterations. And in each sprint, the developers are required to deliver certain portion or section of the product which has been developed. And it basically helps track the development process. It's much easier that way to track everything in a systematic manner. Let's look at, oh, sorry, what did I do? Yeah, here, Scrum terminology. So different types of terminologies which are required to understand in order to see the whole picture of the Scrum. So these are the terms which are associated. So without knowing these terms, you won't be able to understand what actually goes on in Scrum. So product, you already know that's basically your software product, which is required to be developed by the team. Um, and then the product owner. So product owner is the project's key stakeholder, and represents different types of users, customers, and others in the process who are actually related in the whole developmental process. Then the product owner is often someone from the product management or marketing, sort of a user in any way it's actually associated with the product. Then is your product backlog. So your product backlog is actually a to-do list or a prioritized features list containing every desired feature or change to the product. So sometimes the backlog term can be confusing because it's used for two different things. So to clarify, the product backlog is a list of desired features in the product, and the sprint backlog is a list of tasks to be completed in the sprint. So there is a product backlog and there is a sprint backlog as well. So they actually point to two different things. Their meaning are actually considered in a two separate ways. So product backlog, it actually relates to the list of desired features in the product. What are the actually required features? And sprint, when we say sprint backlog, it means what are the list of tasks which are sort of backlogged and needs to be completed within a specific deadline or timeline. The development team, the people who are associated with the development of the software product. Then I just mentioned the sprint. So the sprint is nothing but your series of iterations in a Scrum. Okay. And and in an incremental way the product is developed. Then your scrum is actually your daily team meeting where the progress is sort of reviewed and sort of discussions goes on, and sort of agreements or different decisions are taken regarding the development. So each day during the sprint, a brief meeting, which is called your daily scrum, is conducted. It has to occur daily, okay, during the project development. And this type of scrum meeting will help set the context of each day's work, and also helps the team stay on track. And all the team members are required to attend the daily scrum, and they have to update the whole team that how much progress they have done, or what are the issues or anything related to that needs to be discussed. Let's see into more detailed picture of scrum terminology. So there are three concepts again: Scrum Master, potentially shippable product increment. Product increment means through increments or through sprints, how the product development is tracked. Then velocity is how much, um, in each sprint, while you divide the progress into different iterations. So an estimate of how much work a team can actually do in a single sprint. That's so velocity, or you can say the speed of development, okay, or the work can be done or could be done in a single sprint. And your scrum master is actually responsible for making sure that the team is as productive as possible. And he or she also does this by helping the team use the scrum process, by removing various impediments to the progress, or by protecting the team from outside and so on different issues. Actually everything will be coordinated by the or managed by the scrum master. Looking into to understand in a more visual, through a visual representation, I have added this picture which is not from your book. So the visual representation, what actually it tells, so it gives an introduction to the essential elements of using scrum for agile development. So on the left here we can see the product backlog, which has been prioritized by the product owner, and it contains everything desired in the product that's known at a specific time. And the 2 to 4 week sprints are actually shown by a larger green cycle here. This actually relates to your sprint. And at the start of each sprint, the team selects the amount of work from the product backlog and commits to complete that work during that particular sprint. Whatever is assigned, that need to be completed in that particular sprint, so that the project development should be on the track. Then part of figuring out how much they can commit to is creating a sprint backlog, and which is a list of tasks needed to deliver the selected product backlog items that needed to be completed in the sprint. So at the end of each sprint, the team produces your potentially shippable product increment. And each day, during the sprint, the team member um, have a meeting to discuss the project progress, and if there are any hurdles or issues or problems for completing the work at that particular sprint. So there should be a daily scrum meeting, and sprint actually lasts for about 2 to 4 weeks, not more than that. And product is or software is developed in a sort of incremental manner. Hope you got some idea about the Scrum and how it's associated with Agile technology. So let's see, review the key roles of the Scrum. So product owner. So as you know, I just mentioned the product owner is the major project's key stakeholder. It may represent, it may relate to any users associated, any customers or others in the process. Uh, so then next, let's see the Scrum Master, about which I have mentioned that in the terminologies. So Scrum Master is someone who is responsible for making sure the team is as productive as possible. And Scrum Master does this by helping the team to use the Scrum process. There are certain there is a certain process which everyone need to follow, and they help with removing the impediments or issues to the progress, and by protecting the team from outside and various other things. Um, those are all carried out by the or managed by the Scrum Master. Mm, then you just had an idea about Scrum and sprints, that sprint um, is actually your fixed length periods of about 2 to 5 weeks, and in a Scrum, through different through phases of sprints or iteration of activities in the sprints, the project is delivered in sort of an incremental way. And in sprint, every team will have daily meetings, and shippable product will be delivered through the various increments. Let's see the Scrum cycle. Let me make it a little bit bigger. It basically explains about the same things that I just explained to you through that previous visual representation of Scrum and sprint and product backlog, everything. Um, so you're just going to start here, and how your product backlog is associated with so many attributes, and then how it sort of also related to your sprint backlog. So again, I'm going to just give you a review about the whole process. So Scrum process's main idea is that the software should be developed in a series of sprints. Correct? I just mentioned about it. And with each sprint, which actually lasts from about 2 to 4 weeks. So during each sprint, team will have different daily meetings, such as Scrum meetings, to review the work done, and the sprint backlog is used to keep track of work that is to be done during that sprint. And sprint planning is based on the product backlog actually, which is a list of activities that have to be completed to finish the product being developed. And before a new sprint actually starts, the product backlog is reviewed, and the highest priority items are selected for the implementation in the next sprint. Everything has to be completed, whatever is assigned to a particular sprint, each time checking the product backlog. And your team members will work together to plan the sprint by analyzing the selected items to create the sprint backlog. Uh, so during implementation, actually what happens, the team implements as many of the sprint backlog items as they can in the fixed time period allowed for the sprint. And incomplete, what anything which cannot be completed or incompleted items, they are actually returned to the product backlog. And sprints are never extended to finish that incomplete item. The sprint produces either your shippable product increment that can be delivered to customers, or an internal deliverable. Okay, that is another one thing, internal deliverable. So internal deliverable, such as a product prototype or sort of a design, which can provide information about the future sprints. So if sprint output is a part of final product, it should be complete unless the team has to change the software functionality. It shouldn't have to do any more work on that software increment in future sprints. And on completion of your sprint, a review meeting is held involving all team members, and the team discusses what went well during the sprint and what problems arose and how the problems were tackled. And team members also reflect on the effectiveness of the tools and various methods used. So, it's sort of the main ambition of this meeting is sort of learning from each other how the various problems could be avoided and how to improve the productivity in the future upcoming sprints. So, this is sort of a cycle of the whole Scrum, and two major aspects are your product backlog and sprint backlog. Let me make it a little bit smaller. Then different benefits of using Scrum. So, uh, as as you know, why are we using Scrum in Agile? Because to stay on track of our development, right? So, if there are any unstable requirements, they shouldn't actually stop the progress. Okay, and the product can be broken, okay, into feasible set of chunks or sections, so that it can be easily understandable and acceptable. Then customers see on time delivery. There is because you have the sprint um, activity, so product is actually delivered in a sort of incremental order, shippable incremental order, or the order of the product. So that's why everyone can stay on time of the delivery, and it improves team communication, and also it enhances the trust between the customers and developers. In addition to this, there are so many benefits as well. You can look at of different documents attached to the Scrum technology in Agile development. So some of the most popular related to revenue, that can be developed or incremented through or enhanced through the software development, Agile technology or Scrum technology. Then how benefits could be um, accepted in terms of quality of product, how there is a transparency between every user in the product development. Um, then something related to risk or flexibility, then cost control, and uh, how do you accept the valuability of the product, and um, how much how much speed actually is needed to um, actually provide or release the product to the actual market. So these are some of the benefits. uh, but here we just have the 5 benefits, and those are explained in the book as well. You can check them out. Scrum practices. We just saw what is your product backlog, what is a sprint, why it is called time boxed, because it stays or lasts for about 2 to 5 weeks, and self-organizing teams. Actually, these type of team, they make their own decision by discussing their issues and making the decisions by consensus. Let's look into more detail about the product backlog. The product backlog actually relates to your features required for the development of the product. So, product backlog is a prioritized list of work for the development team that is derived from the roadmap and its requirements. So, most important items are shown at the top of the product backlog, so the team knows what to deliver first. And the development team doesn't work through the backlog at the product owner's pace, and the product owner shouldn't push the work to the development team. Instead, your development team pulls the work from the product backlog as there is a capacity for it. And that there are again two terms associated with that. It can be done either continually or by iteration, which is Scrum. So the continual thing is actually called Kanban, And the iterative thing that you already know, the terminology Scrum, which we all discussed already. Then the product backlog, it can include a various variety of different items such as product features to be implemented. So what can be those product features? They can be user requests or essential development activities. These are here. Or desirable engineering improvements. So these are some of the product features which could be considered under your product backlog. Okay. So let's see, let's look at one example of the product backlog item. So here the table, you can read it once. So there are different examples, 5 different examples are there. So the table shows different types of product backlog items. So the first 3 are actually sort of related to features of the product that have to be implemented. Fourth item is a team activity, developmental activity, and the team must spend time on deciding how to select an open source software that may be used in later increments. And your last item, implement encryption of all personal user data, sort of concerned with engineering improvement. We are including the concept of encryption, so that comes under your engineering improvement. So the last term is concerned with your engineering improvement to the software, and this actually doesn't lead to new software functionality. So these are some of the product backlog items. So you can just look at different examples, additional examples in book as well, in addition to all these, sort of understanding what type of items or examples could possibly be considered as a product backlog item. Okay, so your activities, what are the various product backlog activities? So we have refinement, estimation, creation, and prioritization. So yeah, just let's look at all of them. So refinement, what happens here, the purpose is actually is to add details and estimates, okay, and order to the product backlog and its product backlog items. So during the product backlog refinement, items are actually reviewed and revised. In estimation, so it's used for the activities basically meant for estimating the effort required to complete a prioritized task in the product backlog. And this effort is usually measured with respect to the time it will take to complete that task. Okay. Then next comes your creation and prioritization. So in creation, new items are added to backlog, and these may be new features suggested by the product manager. Um, you can include feature changes, engineering improvements. mm, yeah. And a product backlog is a prioritized. I have already mentioned what is a product backlog. And so whatever items you have in the product backlog, those are prioritized first. Then next comes prioritization. So it's sort of related to your product backlog concept that I have mentioned earlier. So these are the activities to be carried out in the product backlog system. So PBI, estimation metrics. So in PBI, product backlog estimation metrics, uh, we have effort required and story points. Yeah, only these 2 metrics. We don't have anything more. So in effort required, it can be expressed in person hours or person days, that is number of hours or days it would actually take one person to implement that product backlog increment PBI. And this is not the same as the calendar life. So calendar time, actually it relates, it somehow explained it in this way. So several people may work on an item, and that may reduce or shorten the calendar time required. Okay. So how many hours are basically needed, or how many days are basically needed for a certain person or group of person? How much effort is required? Then we have story points. So story points are an arbitrary estimate of effort involved in the implementation of PBI, and it takes basically into account the size of task, its complexity, what kind of technology required, and various unknown characteristics of the work as well. So if we are learning about, if we are looking at story points, there is one concept, user story. Okay, storyboard writing, user story. We will look into more practical examples of that in our future chapters or upcoming chapters. Just for now, to mention, so user story is actually an informal general explanation of a software feature written from the perspective of the end user or customer. So the purpose of user story is to actually articulate how a piece of work will deliver a particular value back to the customer. Okay. It's just a few sentences. User stories are just a few sentences in simple language that can outline the desired outcome. And they don't actually go into detail. So, in an incremental way, the requirements are sort of added later after discussion, thorough discussion within a team. So, that's your user story or storyboard writing or story points. Let's look into the sprint activities. We just saw so many things associated with your product backlog items. Let's look into sprint. Your sprint is also associated with your product backlog items. We just saw that in our previous slides through a diagram. So sprint planning, execution, and reviewing. In sprint planning, what happens? The work items to be completed in that sprint are selected, and if necessary, refined to create a sprint backlog. And this shouldn't last more than a day at the beginning of the sprint. Then sprint execution. Here, the team work to implement the sprint backlog items that have been chosen for that sprint. If it is impossible to complete all the sprint backlog items, the sprint will not be extended. And any unfinished items, I have also mentioned that earlier. So if there is something unfinished or incomplete in that particular sprint, they are actually returned to the product backlog and will sort of saved or queued for the future sprint execution. Then you're reviewing. So any work which is done in the sprint is reviewed by the team and possibly by anyone external which is related, who is related to the product development. And the term will reflect on what are the things that went well and what went wrong during the sprint, with a view of improving their work process. Hope you understood the activities which are to be carried out or emphasized in the sprint. Okay, so sprint activities, these are, we just saw the sprint planning, execution, and then next your sprint reviewing those activities. So these are shown in this figure here. So let's give me 1 second. So let's elaboratively look at various terms associated here in the activities, this diagram, in our next slides. First, let's look into sprint planning. So the most important preparation or planning is to ensure that product backlog has been refined to an appropriate level of detail, sort of paying attention to the estimate or how much criteria of acceptance it is actually satisfying. So everyone sort of have to establish an agreed sprint goal, and they mainly focus on emphasize on the software functionality, support performance, and reliability. And you need to the team need to prioritize what are the list of items according to the product backlog items, which product backlog items that need to be implemented first, and then you need to create a sprint backlog. Okay. Looking at the details from the product backlog, you also have to create a sprint backlog. Then next, some more details about the sprint planning. uh, let's see this example here. In this table, not an example, it basically explains more about the Scrum. Uh, so you already know, right? There is a daily meeting of Scrum, and there is a sprint backlog which need to be reviewed, and what are the things need to be emphasized on the Scrum meetings, all those things. So we just can say that Scrum is a framework that helps the teams work together, and often thought of as an agile project management framework. The Scrum describes a set of meetings, tools, and roles that work in concert to help the team structure and manage their work mostly. Okay. It basically just reiterating the same concepts that I have mentioned earlier. So agile activities like the Scrum or sprint activities, we do have agile activities. Here we have test automation and continuous integration. So Scrum does not actually suggest the technical agile activities that should be used. However, we think there are two practices that should always be used in the sprint in terms of agile, that is your test automation and continuous integration. So as far as possible, product testing should be automated. Okay, we have two types of testing, manual and automation testing. So it's usually advisable and technically feasible to do. It's complex though, okay, because if you have to do automation, you have to be technically efficient. Okay, so as much as possible, try to do the testing of the products try to incorporate some sort of automation. And you should the team member should actually develop a shoot or that you can say a program, a complex script, right? A combination of instructions, of executable tests that can be run at any time. So let's say there may be certain requirements while during a software development, like whenever you want to test the software which is being developed, how do you test it? Does someone have to be physical, be present? Not physically, and someone can be also present online, virtually, and do the testing. But is it always feasible to do the testing at a particular time as per someone's availability? No. You can have people can have or team members can have some sort of automated scripts which need to be scheduled at a particular time on which they can run and automatically do the work, do the testing, and give us the outputs, um, or further details which are needed in the development. Hope you understand what I'm trying to explain. Okay. Then your continuous integration. So whenever anyone makes changes to the software components they are developing, These components should be actually immediately integrated with other components to create a system. This one I have already mentioned. So if you have multiple sections, right, we are seeing so many concepts about incremental development, right, in Scrum, in Sprint. So we have multiple sprints for multiple development in incremental order. So what happens actually? So in Sprint, one by one in every sprint phase, uh, suppose phase one product development is done. In this second sprint, phase two product development is done. Phase three, the third sprint development, then fourth sprint. So these are the product increments, right? So in each sprint, let's say these two are first developed, they are supposed to be continually integrated together in order to see the whole system, whether it is working fine as expected or not. Hope it makes sense to you. So each time whenever a product increment is developed through each sprint cycle, they are supposed to be continually integrated. Okay, just to make sure that everything is fine. Or otherwise, if you don't do that, then that there may be some point, at some point there may be certain issue, and something in between these two may break, which will sort of affect the whole product development. And it can be um, very high cost. It will be it will cost high, or it may need additional effort, additional time. These are not needed or required for your product. Okay, next, code completeness checklist. So you can read them out. So the code completeness checklist here: product must be reviewed to meet certain agreed coding standard. It need to be unit tested and executed successfully. Then code need to be integrated with project code base without integration errors and to be integration tested. And various acceptance tests will be run to confirm that product backlog item has been completed. You may be learning about so many testing, right? Testing methodology, there is unit testing, there is integration testing, there is acceptance testing. So many things are there. If you are going to get started with your software career, let's say you join a company, these are different types of if you're going to start a career in testing, right? So you may do manual testing, or you may do automation testing. So these are some of the phases, different types of testings, and this course here will give you a sort of understanding of how actually nowadays the software organizations are actually operating or running, what type of standards they are following. Okay, you may find all these concepts familiar when you start your career in software industry. So you know there are two different types of there are many type of employees, but development actually involved that there can be a development team in a project. Also there can be testing team. So development team is mostly responsible for development. Sometimes they do some sort of testing, okay, sort of unit testing to check everything is working fine or not. But there should be a dedicated team of testers which are mostly responsible for various types of testings, and those they can either do manual testing or automation testing. So either you prefer the development way or you prefer a tester. So if you are trying to be a tester, then there are other courses which you may need when you know you have to prepare yourself in order to understand the way the company actually will be using for the testing for their products. Sprint review. So at the end of every sprint, there is a review meeting. Okay, and this helps to review whether or not a sprint has met its goal, and it can set out new problems and issues that may emerge during the sprint. And this is a way for a team to reflect on how they can improve the way they work. This is a next comes your self-organizing team. So self-organizing team is a team that has the autonomy to choose how best to accomplish their work rather being directed by others outside the team. So at the simplest level, a self-organizing team is one that doesn't depend on or wait for the manager to assign work. They sort of do everything on their own. Next comes your team size composition. Uh, so the team size, the Scrum team, it usually involve people with different levels of experience, different types of skills, and the team size can range in between 5 to 8 people, and they will be mostly responsible for the delivery of the product in a successful way. External interactions. So in Scrum, the idea is that developers should focus on develop, and only the Scrum Master and the product owner should be involved in external interactions. The intention is that actually the team should be able to work on software development without any external interface or distraction. So, sort of Scrum Master and product owner will play as intermediary in between the actual development testing team and the external users, maybe client or other stakeholders, major stakeholders of the project. Next comes project management. We are about to complete this chapter. Few slides are just left. So, project management is again another whole area. Okay, there are many certifications based on the project management. One of them I know, PMP. You know, something my husband was doing in past. So if you need to lead a project, you have to manage a project. You sort of have to prepare yourself. There are so many uh, certifications available. Also, I know about Scrum management as well. So to be a Scrum manager, in order to lead a Scrum team, there are some required certifications as well. Okay. Once you get into the software industry, you will get well acquainted with all these terminologies. So a self-organizing team has to appoint someone to take on the responsibilities. Because of the need to maintain the continuity of communication with people outside the group, and sort of rotating these activities around team members is not actually viable. So the developers of the Scrum um, did not consider that the Scrum Master should also have the project management responsibilities. But in many companies, however, Scrum Master has to take on the project management responsibilities. It depends on company to company how they actually operate. These are some of the project management responsibilities. Mm, So there is reporting, administration, then people, everything related to your project management. So reporting is a project management. In project management, simply refers to providing the high level overview that offers critical data the project generates in a simple, easy to use format. And it's essential uh, to the project management success, since it provides a window into what's happening, what to do about it for an entire team. In your administration, It refers to tools and various processes used to manage the relationships with the vendors. There comes the finance, area, compliance, procurement, liaison. So, administration phase results in the continual creation of procurement of documents and spreadsheets that may drive the project changes. The a centralized system of contract change monitoring and control will be used to evaluate and determine whether a potential change to contracts are needed. So there are formal physical inspections and reviews of procurement operations in order to generate the performance report, which can sort of provide a real-time feedback. So the administration process is extremely important, and it's usually managed through supply chain or the project management software. Then project management is associated with people, so people's vacations, absence, the quality of their work, hiring and reviewing, everything comes under this section. So that's all in this chapter. We just some of the key points. We learned about the Agile software technology, software engineering methods. Then what is the importance of Agile? What is extreme programming? Then we looked into the concept of Scrum. In the Scrum, we learned about product backlog, sprint backlog, how they are related to each other, and what are the important activities that are actually carried in them, and some more details about the self-organizing team, various types of Scrum practices, such as your um, just mentioned product backlog, sprints, and self-organizing teams, and various other aspects. So this is your everything about the chapter 2. Let me mention something here. Mm, I plan on starting the chapter 3 next week, next Monday. For now, what I did in chapter 2, there are two things for you. So why not simply code is a discussion, and the due date is February 13. I hope you are fine with this due date. Okay, it's end of this week, and there is a test as well. Okay, let me check the due date of the test. I think it will show up here. Yeah, the test due date is on February 18. So I hope it's fine, the due date, or do you want another due date? Something more later?